Josh, introduce yourself to the boys and girls.
Hello, everybody. I'm Josh. I run a little YouTube channel called the Ham Radio Crash Course. And I guess I'm all over the internets with the same name. So radio stuff, particularly amateur radio.
Two-way radio stuff, not real radio stuff.
Amateur radio.
Okay. And you're pretty much the ham radio expert on the YouTubes, right?
No, I think I have one of the largest YouTube channels, but I don't know that I would call myself an expert. I got to make sure I'm in the
well, we won't call you an expert, but you do know a lot about ham radio. Yeah, that's a loaded
I think it's safe to say I know a lot about ham radio. Yeah.
Okay, so it would be safe to say I'm going to call you an expert. You're the expert today between two radio enthusiasts. I'm just a hobbyist. No, I'm not even a hobbyist. I use radio as a tool, not as a hobby.
You're a radio knuckle dragger, is what you're saying.
Yeah, pretty much. So we're going to talk about some popular two-way amateur and GMRS radio myths. Let's say popular. They're not really popular, but they're common. I think everybody, if you've been online, watched YouTube videos, read comments, or been on online forums, have probably heard every one of these myths or claims. So we're going to talk about each one. Every one of these is real. Some people have actually said everything that I'm going to go through. Some people have posted online as fact and truth.
Okay.
So we're going to go over them, and we will, between the two of us, decree and declare whether it's a myth or truth. Is it true, or is it a myth? Is it myth busted, or is it true? And if you get it wrong, I'll correct you, so don't worry.
Oh, good. Okay, yeah, good. So you got the facts. You're Bob Barkering me a little bit here, right?
Yeah, I'm just making this shit up as I go. And of course, if we get it wrong, if between the two of us we get it wrong, I encourage anyone to leave a comment to correct us. Mm-hmm. You just better be sure as heck to have something to back up your claim.
Yes.
Because otherwise everybody's going to laugh at you. Because that's the problem with some people is they just say stuff. They just pull it right out of their voice hole.
I always like to remind the chat, like, the internet exists, and you can look things up, and there's things, past precedents that have been set in law and all that stuff. I use that as an example, but those are important things. Those are real things. You can reference those. You can say things like that.
The problem is you have to know what you're doing when you reference something wrong. Some clown on X saying something doesn't necessarily, just because it's on the internet doesn't mean that it is precedent or true or correct.
Truly, yes.
All right, are you ready?
I hope so. I've got nothing. I'm going in blind. Here we go, kids.
All right. So the first one that I see, and I see this posted by experts all the time, if you transmit without an antenna on your two-way radio, you will immediately destroy your radio, or they're kind of related. If you transmit with an SWR above 3, nobody will hear you, and you will destroy your radio. Period. No ifs, ands, or buts. No exceptions. That's just a fact.
Yeah. So,
true or myth?
Oh boy. All right. So the first, we got to take them in parts, because this is actually a very, very important thing, right? So the first part of this is for handheld radios. Are we focusing just on handhelds, or can I go deeper into other radio?
Well, some people post this as fact, period, no ifs, ands, or buts. There's no qualifications. It's just, so if you want to break it down.
Yeah. So if one of these has got to have power on it, but here's a radio, and I'm.
No.
Ah, it's exploding. Although it is, when is it doing that? That's weird.
You're on an invalid frequency. It's not.
That's probably what it is. No. What was I doing with this radio exactly? Yeah, there we go. Okay. And I'm transmitting. I'm transmitting on 220, no less. 220. So that's even more explosive. Most handhelds have the capability to transmit without an antenna. You're putting power into the connector. If anything, the radio's folding back, as we call it. So it knows that there's not an appropriate load on the other end of that, whatever the connector is, and it's not putting any power out. even if it is, the circuitry of the radio is built usually robust enough that it's not going to blow itself up. With that said, I think that this comes from a time of the past when handhelds weren't as robust. And yes, you could damage them. Not all of them, but some of them truly were destroyed or at least harmed in some way. And then HF, high-frequency amateur radios. I have radios today that if you were to transmit without an appropriate load, either a dummy load or an antenna, you could damage what we call the finals. And that's the power amplification stage of the radio. So amateur radio, our favorite answer is it depends. Handhelds of today's age is fine. A lot of HF radios of today's age, fine. I've done this with mobile radios accidentally and nothing exploded, fine. So there's part one. Do you want to give me what the survey says?
Yeah.
Keep going? Okay. Yeah. So the 3-to-1 SWR number often comes up, I think, and this is, the ham radio in me. A lot of our tuners, radio matching networks that we have in our HF radios are usually a 3-to-1 match tuner. And so we'll use those when the antenna is a little bit outside the resonance space or a little bit outside, not resonance, wrong term, the standing wave ratio range, and it'll help bring that back in. Now, there is a fundamental difference between the reactance of an antenna, which is the point in which it becomes a purely 50 ohm load, purely resistive, and that's when you're actually putting the RF into the antenna and it is able to radiate out of that antenna. That is your reactance point. Well, your standing wave ratio, which most radios want a 50 ohm impedance on here, that doesn't always line up with where the reactance is best for the antenna. So you could be in a situation where you have a very reactive antenna in terms of being able to put your RF down through it, but your SWR might be off, and in some cases, north of 3-to-1 SWR. More often than not, though, the SWR follows a reactance curve, if you will, and so we use SWR because it's kind of easy to test for. But no, that doesn't mean you're not putting power out. In some cases, you might be better off transmitting at the better reactance side of the antenna than purely an SWR of 1-to-1, for instance, as we use as the perfect antenna.
Okay, so so as far as the transmitting with no antenna, destroying your radio, it's possible. It depends.
Older radio, yeah, older radio.
And with the high SWR, I guess it's kind of a myth. It
depends. I hate to give you the solid myth busted, because there are truly situations where if you have a 3-to-1 SWR and higher, you are putting out likely less power because you're also probably not in a reactive area.
Okay, but that's going to be, so let's say you're at 4-to-1. And compared to 2.9, which is okay, right? According to the experts, 2.9 is fine, but 4.0, 4-to-1 would be bad. But that difference in actual power output is going to be a tiny percentage, right? Or I know it's kind of exponential. It goes up the higher you go, right?
Yeah.
But is it likely is not enough to cause a big difference in the range on your signal?
It's that likely is going to come down to the antenna.
Okay.
Right? So it's going to depend on the type of antenna. If it's just a standard whip antenna, that came with the radio, then these are all pretty poorly matched SWR antennas to begin with. So you're not going to get that much difference. But if you're building an antenna, say a Yagi, something directional, then a SWR of 3 or even 4-to-1 would not be advisable. You would want to improve upon that.
Okay. And then either way, whether without an antenna or with a real high SWR, that will cause heat inside the radio, right?
Yes.
Which is not good.
Okay. Without the antenna, I have a feeling, or at least my understanding, is that you're probably not putting out that much power to begin with, and the radio's like, I don't have a good load to put my energy into, so I'm just not going to put out that much energy. It's going to fold back. Right. Back. Now, if you have a 4-to-1 SWR and it's poorly matched, meaning you are getting reflections. So SWR is the standing wave ratio that we use to determine what the forward or the actual outgoing power is and the reflected power. Well, that reflected power is often heat, at least when it collects into the radio as it's passing through the whole cycle.
And heat is not good.
You can heat things
in a
up.
radio.
What's that?
Yeah. Well, heat is not good on the electronic components, right?
Yeah, and particularly over
the best
time
thing.
too.
All right, because I've done 2 videos where I tested transmitting without an antenna, a handheld and a 50-watt mobile radio, and the 50-watt mobile radio got really, 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 really hot, and it started like the dust inside started smoking and stuff, or I could smell it, the dead bugs and stuff. So a lot of heat, but it still worked fine, and actually to this day, actually still works fine.
Yeah, these radios are going to have different circuitry. There's no reason that the layout of a handheld is going to be the same as a mobile, and maybe the mobile, the manufacturers were like, no, dummy's going to not plug a coax and some kind of load into this and run it for 5 minutes.
You just made a
so
better
they didn't
dummy.
have that much fold back capability into it. And yeah, they were heating the crap out of the radio. That can happen. Yeah.
All right. Yeah, okay. So possible on that question. Possible. Okay. Depends. That's the official.
Depends. That's the official radio Mythbuster term.
All right. So next one, which is sort of related. If you coil up your coax, you will choke the power going into your antenna. Nobody will hear you, and you will destroy your radio.
Absolutely busted. This is absolutely busted. Okay. This is on the same line as probably some other common myths you hear that came out of the CB world.
Well, I was just going to ask, does it apply to CB, which is much lower frequencies? Because I remember hearing it way back in the CB days as well.
It does not. No, I've never heard any situation where coiling. I mean, the only thing that could possibly be, but I'm probably still going to stick with busted. So coax has a center pin, and then there's a dielectric, right, an insulator, and then there's a mesh wrap, a metal wrap that goes around it. Well, coax has a bend rating that you shall not exceed this bend ratio. So if you took a piece of coax and you just put a kink in it, well, if you took a 90-degree kink in coax, well, you possibly just pushed the center connector through the dielectric into the metal jacket, the weave. Well, when you do that, you've now taken your positive and negative and shorted them. So that can cause a problem. And that could be the origin of this myth, is that if you tightly coil your coax, eventually over time, that center pin will start to migrate through the dielectric and short out into the jacket.
Okay, but otherwise, just the coil itself isn't going to cause a problem.
Should not, no.
All right, and now another kind of related myth that I used to hear, mostly with CB. I haven't heard this with GMRS or ham, but you're a radio expert. So with CB radio, you always want, if you're installing your radio in a vehicle, you want that cable length to be exactly, I think it was 19 feet. Because if it's 18 feet...
I've heard 13.
Okay.
Yeah.
And if it's 6 inches off, nobody's going to hear you, and you're not going to be able to transmit anywhere. Does the length of the cable within reason, obviously if it's 200 feet long and you got it all coiled up, you're going to lose your power. But if it's 13 feet versus 21 feet, does that matter? So we're talking CB radio, 27 megahertz.
Right. Totally busted. Now, this one, I heard this. We've all heard this, I think. I hear it less now. If anything, CB is more resilient to these types of coax losses that you're talking about than something like GMRS, which is much higher frequency. So in most cases, your standard CB mobile application, 25 feet, 30 feet of coax even if you got a big honking coil sitting somewhere underneath the seat, is not a problem. Not a problem at all.
Myth busted.
Busted. Easily.
I'm going to have to come up with a graphic. Boom. Myth busted.
Yeah, you're going to have to. That's a good creative moment there. Yeah, that's going to be fun.
Yeah. The best way to talk more FARs, and for you non-radio people, that's distance or range, is to transmit with more power. More power is the best way to get greater range.
At some point, more power becomes part of the equation, but the
single one thing to do.
Single one way to do is, well, obviously have a working radio. But after that is have the best possible antenna for your intended transmitting goals.
Well, now what about height?
Well, height above ground is, again, if we're talking let's start with GMRS because I know that's the common type of videos you make. Yes, a higher antenna is going to be better at that, right? Going back to your handheld. So if I'm on the top of a summit, for instance, and I take my radio and I turn it sideways, is that going to perform better than holding it like this? No. But it's the same antenna. Why? What happened? Well, now it's polarized horizontally. So that's not good. So yes, height is good, but also having an alignment with the intended target of your signals is also very, very important. And in those cases, like if you really wanted the most FARs, you could use a Yagi, right? That provides forward gain, it looks like a TV antenna for those that have no idea what I'm talking about. Now, if I was holding
it's like a laser
Yagi,
beam.
it's like a mag light where you could twist it and the beam goes whoop, like that, that kind of style. So if I'm holding a Yagi and I've got my radio connected to it and I point at the location I want to, I'm focusing most of my RF in that direction. And if I have a good line of sight, a clear path to that, I'm going to get way more FARs in that direction than any other direction versus this guy's called omnidirectional, where it's transmitting equally on all sides out from the broad side of the antenna, so straight off of the side of it.
So if you had a choice, if you're using a small mobile radio in your house with a little antenna in your window, if you had a choice between adding a 40-watt amplifier and just putting a good antenna on the roof.
Oh,
antenna on the roof.
Always antenna on the roof at the highest point you can get it.
Okay, so the best way to talk more FARs is to use more power. Myth busted.
Busted. At least
busted.
Until after you get the antenna. Then you maybe
and then you can start talking about spending more money on more power.
Sure.
Here is one that I know is near and dear to your heart because we have spoken of this before. You might have made an entire video about it.
It's possible.
When you get a GMRS, when you apply for a GMRS or ham radio license, I guess when it is granted, you are authorizing the government via the FCC to enter your home anytime, day or night, to inspect your equipment, and there is nothing you can do to stop them.
You kick down the door, they shoot your dog immediately.
They shoot your dog first.
First thing they do. Through your windows, they just go looking for that thing. No, so absolutely not. And in fact, I had a friend of mine who lived in New Jersey, or he still is in New Jersey, but whatever. He had the FCC and investigators come to his door and knock on it to inspect an errant transmitter that they found was in his home. Keep in mind, this is not a radio user. He has no radio license at the time, was not anything.
Was it a baby monitor or something?
No, he had a cable television amplifier in his basement. And the cable company didn't tell him that they put another amplifier on the power line coming, on the where they ran the TV communication cables to the power line. So they were double amplifying it. And in the basement, he was creating this weird situation where he was creating interference.
Explain that, because we talked about this on one of our videos before.
Yeah.
And you told this story. And a lot of people left comments that was impossible because a cable box does not transmit. It's a receiver, not a transmitter. So, there's you know what? One thing I've learned about being a YouTuber is that a lot of people are really just stupid.
Okay,
so
we'll break this down.
So it was, explain how that was happening, because a cable box is not a transmitter.
So let's say your cable company is 20 miles from your home. I don't know. I'm just using this as an example. And there are 18 homes that they have to feed before it gets to you at the very end. And it's going through and it's dropping lines. The communication lines are usually the lower lines on telephone poles and all that stuff. And by the time it gets to you, your signal...
Well, now, hold it. So for clarification, they are transmitting not through the air, but they're transmitting through a cable. All right. So they are the transmitter. The wire is the medium, as us radio experts
Yeah, they are
right?
sending this information in the form of power through the wire. You get the idea. Now, by the time it gets to you, you have a degraded service. Your service is your television comes in staticky. It's not good or whatever. I don't know. I don't know what the problem was. But he was having that situation, and so before the company made their change, he went to Radio Shack back when Radio Shack still existed, and he got an amplifier. And that amplifier takes in the incoming signal, bumps it up a little bit, and sends it on its way to your equipment. And he was using it for years and years and years. And then one day the cable company, unbeknownst to him, went and put another amplifier in line at the telephone pole. And that created a situation where now he has a line getting amplified to the telephone pole coming into his basement, where he then has another amplifier, which who knows what's causing at that point. I'd have to actually go buy 2 of these amplifiers or whatever they did to test it. But the FCC said, hey, you're creating interference, and your proximity to the airport is something that is a problem, and we are investigating it, and our investigation led to your house. Now, all he had to do was unplug the amplifier, which allowed the power to just go through and be unamplified. And the FCC investigators said, yep, the problem is immediately gone. And that was it. And they went their separate ways. No problem.
Okay. So it was his amplifier probably that was just getting overpowered and was emitting these spurious RF emissions, or just this noise, right?
Yeah.
It was transmitting technically, but it wasn't a transmitter.
So
but it was just making noise.
Yeah. I don't, like I said, I don't know the exactly what was happening there, but I do know that when I use an amplifier with my radio, there's an expected drive amount, and it's in the form of watts. We use watts as the amount of power we're putting into the amplifier. And so I have an amplifier that I give it 5 watts of drive, and I get 50 watts of power output out of it, out through the amplifier. So it's possible that these lower powered amplifiers that the cable company added to the telephone pole was giving more power than that little amplifier that he had in his basement could take, or maybe it was just right on the cusp of it, and he was getting spurious emissions outside the expected amplification area, whatever that Radio Shack device was expected to see or deal with. And that caused spurious emissions.
All right. So then back to the myth, which has nothing to do with cable TV, is they didn't bang down his door. He's not even licensed. They knocked on his door. Okay, so now his situation is different because he's not a licensed radio operator.
Well,
right?
But he brought a licensed device into his home.
Okay.
So that device is licensed to be in that space. It's a commercial license or whatever. And my friend is not the license holder, right? But he still brought a licensed piece of equipment into his home. And because of that, the FCC can absolutely knock on the door and ask, can I inspect that? Just like they could do to anyone watching if there was a Wi-Fi router that was misbehaving, if you had a power supply on some device, even your refrigerator, I don't know, that was creating interference. And the FCC, again, they're using direction finding capabilities to pinpoint where that signal's coming from, and then they're knocking on doors. Simply, in most cases, to just get rid of the interference. So they knock on the door, they ask politely, hey, are you doing something? Are you running an illegal pirate radio station? Are you doing this, that, or the other? In my friend's case, they knew exactly what they were looking for. It was an errant device. It was creating weird, spurious emissions, and they said, hey, can you try turning that off and see if your TV's fine and if everything goes away? And it was fine once he did that. But to bring it back to the radio side of things, so if the FCC shows up at your door and you truly do not have a license to operate and you've been operating, you can just say, no, I don't allow you access to come into my home. You cannot. Or if you are licensed, a licensed GMRS user or an amateur radio operator, and they come to your door and they say, hey, I want to inspect something because you're a licensed radio operator and we've got our inspection has led us to your house as the cause of this interference, you can tell them no. And if you tell them no, your license might be forfeit. That's the reality of it. Or what could happen is if you are truly the cause of the interference, which there's 2 ways this can go. It's just random interference that's generated by a device at your home, or intentional, as often comes up. If it's intentional and you continue to do it, just because you told them no, that doesn't mean the investigation goes away. You'll start receiving letters from the FCC, which we've talked about, and you can choose to also ignore those, and eventually you could see yourself getting tossed to the Department of Justice, and they may pursue you in that form. That's basically what I've heard, how that goes down, and I think that there's no examples of it going any other way at this point.
Okay, so you're not giving away your whatever Fourth Amendment or whichever amendment that is, that right. They don't automatically the myth goes that they can come into your house. You have given away your right to prevent them from coming inside, and they can and they will. And if you say no, if you just say no, thank you, the worst that can happen is they revoke your license. If you actually read the rules, it says something about they may revoke your license, and then, like you said, they may issue a fine, and then maybe the Department of Justice might actually make you pay that fine.
Way down the line, yeah.
Right.
They're not. I mean, again, these are not people that show up with guns. These are people that literally are using radios to figure out where these problems are coming from and trying to stop it. Now, everybody's got to keep in mind that the FCC's been going after like pirate stations recently. We're seeing a lot of that stuff. Those are people those are people that are intentionally causing this. They're intentionally making that happen. Now, in those cases, may they get a ride along with a sheriff or something like that? I don't know. I don't know every one of these cases. But as far as the investigators are concerned, they're doing an investigation. They think it's there, and they say, hey, can we check it out? And when they say no, or they let them, I don't know. It just furthers the investigation. That's all that's happening.
Okay. So as far as signing away your right when you apply for your license, myth busted?
No, myth busted.
Okay. All right. Okay, here's a popular one that I know if you've ever been online learning about ham radio, you've heard. If you transmit on a ham radio without a license, you will go to jail or get a $10,000 fine.
I have neither seen any instance of that happening. I've not seen that.
I'm going to say that's myth busted.
Myth busted.
Now, there may be times when if you're causing intentional interference for a long time using a ham radio and you don't have a license, and if you're just causing interference to other ham radio operators, the chances are very, very low that they, at least in the last 10 years.
There you go.
30 years ago, it was different. So don't, a lot of people bring up these cases, well, in 1974,
right.
My next door neighbor went to jail or whatever. Well, buddy, this ain't 1974
if your example is a time before there was the internet, that's probably not a good example for use case here. Now, you said specifically amateur radio.
If you transmit on a ham radio with no license. So basically the argument is...
ham. It's a radio that transmits on amateur radio frequencies,
not...
Bufang. What's that?
A Bufang.
Well,
a Bufang.
But we got... Okay, no, those are two... Okay. I will clarify this because I want to make sure people understand. There are privileged frequencies that amateur radio operators use. They're not the same frequencies as GMRS users use. Now, you may have a Baofeng radio that can transmit in both those spaces, but you are using the frequencies of that service when you are doing this. So, your question is a little nuanced to unpack, but when I say, oh, this is a ham radio, I'm usually taking that as this operates on the ham radio frequencies. If you take that same Baofeng, let's say it's a very wide transmitting Baofeng, and somewhere in between the amateur radio and GMRS frequencies, you land on a first responder frequency that is actually a big deal if you create interference on. They can investigate that. They can and have fined people very recently. One of our, the radio, what was the guy's name? The comms guy that was trying to direct the helicopters for the. Yeah. He came up with his own little tag, his handle. Now, that guy could have been using an amateur radio that he either modified or it could transmit out of the amateur radio service to try and drive where the helicopters go. That is absolutely something the FCC will pursue and investigate.
We're going to talk more about that because that's another myth. But
yes.
So the origin of this myth is, some guy gets a Baofeng. Right, it's the UV5R, the terrorist of the ham radio world. And he comes to a forum and he says, hey, how do I use my Baofeng to talk to my friend when I'm playing paintball? And the response often is, you can't do that without your license or you'll go to jail and get a $10,000 fine. So in that scenario, that's myth. Well, you can't say 100% myth busted because there are FCC rules. And that is
Correct.
technically, it is against the rules, but the reality is that just in the last 10 years, 15 years since I've been, that's as far back as I've checked every dang enforcement. There's a lot of them, but
He wakes up in the morning with a cup of Joe and checks out the FCC enforcement website.
I really do.
I believe it. I'm not joking.
So in that scenario, that's myth busted. That is just realistically not going to happen.
The problem is all those words that get into the story start to make it more difficult to unravel. So you don't have, if you do not have privileges on the frequency that your radio says and you key up on it, you're probably doing something the FCC doesn't like. That's it. That's what it comes.
But you're not
down
breaking the law. That's another misconception. It's semantics. Pedantic semantics that you're breaking the law. You're not breaking the law. You're breaking an FCC regulation, which is different
if it comes
in a lot of ways.
I think we'll get to this as we go further down the line, because you already said that we're going to talk about the first responder stuff. Yeah. If there are people who use that frequency to do a very specific job that the society has deemed crucial and you're impeding them from doing it, I assume it's very easy for the FCC to just fine you. But when it comes down to it, are you not interfering with law enforcement or emergency services? And there are definitely laws in certain cities and counties in regards to those things. So that's a different thing. Again,
I get my Baofeng for Christmas, and I use it to play paintball on a ham radio frequency. Let's say it's a locked Baofeng, and I'm on the ham radio frequency. Or I'm just out there trying to talk to the hams to make friends with anonymous men. That in doing so is breaking FCC rules because I'm not licensed, but an FCC rule is not a law.
Correct.
That's what I'm, okay.
Yes.
All right.
There's laws that back it, but that specifically is not a law.
Right. The rule was created by a law.
The Communications Act of 1934.
Of 1934.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. Enough with that one. I don't know. So we deemed that one as stated, myth busted.
Okay.
Sort of, kind of. It depends. It depends.
It depends.
Technically,
it's busted, and it depends.
With an asterisk.
It depends.
With an asterisk.
Yeah.
Okay. I've heard this one a lot lately in different variants. All cheap Chinese radios have a remote kill switch. So in the event of a war with China, they can shut down all GMRS and ham radios, thereby crippling the defenses of these United States. And China can listen in to everything you talk about on your cheap Chinese radio, thereby compromising our defenses of this great country.
You're shutting them good old boys down by sending the kill command to the boofwangs.
Exactly.
Yeah, so everybody got to keep in mind here, a Baofeng is a analog radio. It is cheap, right? It's probably cheaper to produce than we could possibly even imagine. And the little $17 jobber on Amazon, right? You think that's insanely cheap. Just imagine what they actually, what it costs to make these things. So that's one radio. There is another type of radio called DMR radio. And now DMR radio is very popular in the Chinese manufacturer space. They make most of the most popular ones. And there is a kill command within the DMR system, right? You can kill a DMR radio in some cases. That does not exist when we're talking about just analog radio. So there's no hidden kill command in all of them. I think the TID radio may have a funky thing called kill or stun or something like that.
Stun.
But those are very specific use cases that are used in commercial and business type frequency use, not amateur radio, GMRS, and that type of stuff. And they do not function in the same way that you are kind of giving the example of in this case.
All right. And even if China did have the ability to kill all those radios or just listen in, why? Why do they care about a couple of ham radio men chatting anonymously or GMRSers off-roading? That's not really a military advantage in any way that I can see. Maybe someone will leave a comment and explain how that would give them military advantage.
Well, let's play around with that one a little bit. So already you got part of a problem here. So the latter half of your question was, and also the Chinese can listen in on your communications. Well, yeah, if they were line of sight from you and they could be within the receiving path, they could just listen to you anyway, right? So you better believe there's Chinese nationalists that are probably in this country that if you were so interested in your paintball game that you're doing out in the holler, they could go set up a listening station and listen in, and it's in the
just
open,
like anybody
it's in the
else.
Air. Yeah, right. It's still a radio. At the end of the day, you're still transmitting. That could be picked up by anybody. It's in the open. Now, going back to DMR, there are commercial DMR radios that can have encryption added to them, which can help for some privacy and that whole thing. But that's outside of amateur radio and GMRS. But going back to what I think the heart of this one is I think people believe that China has embedded some kind of secret internet capability in these devices.
That's what they're saying. Yeah, and it connects up to your Wi-Fi.
Right.
Forget that you have that password protected.
Yeah.
And then is sending over the internet all your vital.
So every time you pass a Panda Express, this links to the Chinese Wi-Fi, and it sends all the stored data that it's been saving. That's right. What this is doing. No, of course not, because you're talking about the production of probably, I don't even know how many Baofangs have been produced now, in the millions, if not more at this point. Do you know how much of a waste of money that would be to actually produce that? So there's the first thing. The second is the infrastructure of just how do you get all the data out of this and have to build this system that it would then be able to connect off and send it. So the hardware doesn't exist in these things for that capability. It is a VHF, UHF analog radio.
And if it did, surely one of these very smart ham radio guys would have taken it all apart or just listened, put an SDR or whatever, one of those little machines that listens to everything coming out of it, and we would have seen it, right?
Correct. Yeah, it would have a 2.4 gigahertz or 5 gigahertz antenna in it for Wi-Fi or low energy Bluetooth. So you'd have to have some kind of nefarious agent come around and listen to it. And there's just no example of any hardware like that being in the radio. And yeah, there are Wi-Fi handhelds that are made by China, but I've seen no reason to see that they're collecting the data off of that. I think that would, if anything, it'd just make the battery die faster, and you'd just be pissed off, and everybody would go back to the
nobody would buy them.
Baofeng. They'd all just go back to the $17 Baofeng.
All right, myth busted. I'm saying that's calling that myth busted.
I think so.
All right.
Yeah.
All right. The FCC has technology to determine what brand and model of radio you are transmitting on. That's how they know that you have the Baofeng and you don't have a license, or how they know that you're transmitting on GMRS with a Baofeng ham radio, because they can tell the brand and model number of the radio.
In your two examples, absolutely not. Absolutely not.
I have seen, you and I have talked about this, or I've made videos about it, comments from people claiming that they either previously worked with the military and I think at least one guy saying that he worked with FCC or a contractor, some bullshit story. I don't know. I don't know if he's lying or not, but proclaiming that yes, the FCC has the technology to fingerprint a radio. Every radio is different, right? So every radio has a fingerprint, which I could kind of see how that might be true. And they can then, using that fingerprint, know what brand and model it is. And I always, when I say, no, you can't do that, I kind of qualify it by saying, and without previously fingerprinting it. So if they know what my radio fingerprint looks like because they were listening to me and fingerprinting it, these people are saying that, no, right out of the box, never before fingerprinted or anything, they can tell you what brand and model radio you're using. So you're saying...
I was using your two examples. You have a Baofeng for GMRS, a Baofeng for ham radio, and you transmit with a Baofeng. No, there's no fingerprinting in that case. There is radio fingerprinting capabilities, though. That is true. Like, your police officers have P25 radios, and those radios are ID'd. They squawk out who they are. So they are a known entity in the system. But your run-of-the-mill Baofeng, no.
Well, these guys are saying...
I don't agree.
These experts. Okay, they're saying that they can fingerprint it based on the individual characteristics of the little radio waves coming out of your specific radio.
Oh, okay. So that is different. Okay. So now I understand what he's saying. Okay. I took that as like there's some kind of data packet or data.
No. Individual characteristics.
So the
because every radio is different.
Sure. I assume that, your different type of radio manufacturer, just designs of radios, you would be able to see a difference in the characteristics of the particular received signal.
They're saying even same radio model, just unit to unit.
I don't
There's
think
that
so.
much of a difference. Okay.
No, I don't think so.
All right. So let's say, okay, so you're saying that's not true. I don't think it's true, but these guys claim it's true. Someone will leave comments.
Well, this would be a perfect opportunity for someone to link us to something with some actual evidence. So
well, no, they can't because it's top secret. It was in the military, and of course the FCC isn't going to give it up. But leave us.
My uncle was a Navy SEAL and a Special Forces operator.
Right, but let's say that does exist. Let's say that does exist. Surely that technology is not cheap, and they're not going to be driving their vans up and down the street looking for you, right?
No.
So it's like the FCC, if they were investigating you already, maybe.
No, I don't think it's actually an expensive technology thing at all. I think what they're trying to say is if you had 5 of these TID radios, that these radios are either doing something intentionally that has some kind of characteristic difference at a very specific point that uniquely identifies them. So either the bad actor is the radio company, which goes back to China spying on you. There's one side of this. Or there is some thing that they use with a spectrum analyzer, for instance. They capture all this data off and they go, yes, see right here on that FM contour, I'm looking at the frequency modulation, and I can see right here that, yes, at that particular hertz, we've got this thing, and that means it's a TID radio, blah, blah, blah. And also, just like a fingerprint, I know that right there is the TID radio space, and then this one is number 111-27895. Absolutely not. The characteristics capability of that would be insane. But hear me out. If, let's say, you had 2 bad guys, and the bad guys, one guy had this radio and one guy had this radio, and there was an investigation against these 2 guys, and they were transmitting back and forth, and they had months of conversations in the form of spectrum analyzer, blah, blah, blah. They probably can easily fingerprint this radio and this radio over that wide swath of data they collected. But to anonymously be able to differentiate between this TID radio and have some kind of identification system against another same TID radio seems rather difficult.
So I'm sure that some people will leave a comment to correct you.
I'm happy to be wrong on this. I'd like to know more information.
I would too, yes.
And it can't be some cloak and dagger BS. You got to give me something a little bit further down the line explaining what at least the concept is that they're able to do this.
This should be good. Yeah, I'll be watching the comments for that.
Please, yeah.
All right, so this one, I don't know who started this one, but it goes something like ham radio is only good for finding and chatting with anonymous men.
Well, I mean, that's just not true.
It's good for more things.
It's good for more things. Literally, on the last episode of Ham Nation, we talked to I believe, I don't want to assume it, but I believe she was a Mennonite who organized a group of people who flew down to Florida and then chartered a boat and went to the Dry Tortugas, which is an old prison. It's literally just an island. And it was like 9 people, and they made, radio happen. They did Parks on the Air and made contacts to get points. They cooked food, had a great old time, and flew back home, right? So obviously she's not anonymous. She's actually not just an anonymous man. She's actually a radio operator. No, there's a hobbyist side of it. I just built a radio, so building radios is a thing you can do in the hobby. But of course, we're building the thing that allows us to anonymously talk to men. So I don't know. Maybe there's an ounce of truth in this to a certain degree. Well,
even I will say, and I've said this a lot of times, there is, when there's an emergency, right? The hurricane and the tornado, there is a good practical use of ham radio, right? Right.
HF and VHF and UHF. All of it.
I think it comes down to that whole GMRS versus ham radio thing, where it's your amateur radio is a hobby, where the whole point is just playing with the radio, where with many GMRS people, it's just a tool. And when I'm done with that tool, it goes back into the Jeep. I use it to talk to the guys when I'm off-roading. I think that's
an important. Well, okay, I don't want to say this. This is not insult. I'm trying not to insult anybody, but that's just naive.
Go ahead. You can on naive. My channel. You can insult people. I know on your channel you don't like to do that. We do that all the time.
It's just naive. Ham radios are used as tools just as much as GMRS radios are used as tools, right?
But the hobby. If
you're saying
hobbyist,
you're saying hobby. It's considered a hobby and a service in the FCC, and it's a radio service. And if you go to the FCC website, one of the fundamental characteristics of amateur radio is its use for emergency communication as a part of an emergency communications service. We saw that in Asheville, North Carolina, where one repeater brought together multiple states that were all impacted by Hurricane Helene. It was the only form of communication, aside from some Starlinks that they had initially, and more Starlinks were brought in, which helped out tremendously. But amateur radio was king. GMRS was there as well. So was FRS and CB, of course. But amateur radio was king because we had a repeater that was useful. Had it have been a GMRS repeater, we'd all be lauding the capabilities of GMRS too. It is a tool. It was used in a tool in this case, and it was for an emergency that was pretty dire.
Like I said, there are practical, helpful uses for ham radio.
Amateur radio
but there
just
is
has more
difference.
than that. It just has more than that.
You can do more. You can do more. But the average GMRS user doesn't care about that. He just wants to talk to his buddies while he's hiking or on the trail.
I don't know. More than half of the GMRS users, I think, are ham radio operators now, and they're using it as a hobby to begin with. I don't know if that's what we call anymore.
We call that the latent ham radio operator. He doesn't know he's a ham radio operator yet. You're born with that gene. So he starts off on GMRS and he gets the taste in his mouth, and then
I have a feeling most of the GMRS licenses that have been out there forever and ever are already just ham radio operator.
Yeah.
Like it's the same amount of people.
So did we, I guess the one that we just went over. Chatting with anonymous men only. That's myth busted. It's not true. Whoever made that up was lying.
Whoever did that.
Yeah. If you transmit on a ham radio without a license, the ham radio operators in your neighborhood will track you down, and you then will be fined by the FCC or go to jail.
It's kind of a joke that I make to my mom. She's like, Josh, I'm worried about my computer getting hacked. And if I do this, I'm worried about all the hackers out there. And I'm like, Mom, what makes you such a desirable target to hack, would you say? And now I know that's changed significantly over the years, but the hackability quotient is something that I always ask people that are worried, paranoid about things like this, similar kind of story. If you make yourself a problem to a community and you're using a local form of communication, like a handheld radio that's all local, if you piss off enough people and you do it long enough, it doesn't matter if you're GMRS or amateur radio, they're going to try and find you, okay? I mean, we know that's true. We know that's true in both cases. So piss off enough people long enough, someone will try and figure out who you are.
Okay, and then?
I have seen, I have heard stories. I know people who told me this face to face, that they have gone to people's houses and there have been altercations. Some of them are completely cordial and they're like, hey, we figured out who you are. Knock it off or we're going to report you to the FCC. Whatever weight is behind that. Hold on. Whatever weight is behind that, that's a whole different story. The interference stopped, so they took that as a success. And then I've also heard that there have been physical violence that has occurred. I have heard that on certain repeaters. There's some repeaters out here that some of you have heard about where there are enough folks that are willing to go a little bit beyond what other folks might do. And interference has stopped, and it was probably not through a traditional means.
Okay, so the context of this is, again, the guy gets the Baofeng for Christmas, and he wants to go make friends with the anonymous men on the ham frequencies or just go play paintball. And the threat is, no, you can't do that because you didn't get a license, and they will track you down. They do it all the time.
If it's just a guy who bought a Baofeng, programmed a repeater, hopped on the repeater, started talking to people, likely what's going to happen pretty quickly is they're going to figure out you don't have a license. Even if you pretend you have a license, they'll eventually figure it out, and they'll stop talking to you. They'll tell you, hey, you got to go get a license, and then they'll just stop talking to you. Okay,
but back to the myth, you can be tracked down. We're going to talk more about that in a second.
You did the video. You did the video with me where we did it.
Right. But then and you will be fined by the FCC. So the myth goes, the ham radio guys, they're everywhere. They will track you down, and then they will hand you over to the FCC, who will then make you pay a fine.
We'll citizens arrest you, and we'll take you to the FCC field office that's in every town to drop you off.
Hold you in the local holding cell there.
Specifically, the FCC department that definitely exists in every town. No, I haven't seen any of that. That last quarter mile you mentioned in the story. No, I've not seen that.
Okay, myth busted.
Yeah,
myth busted. That does not necessarily mean that I or we condone that you use your Baofeng without a license.
No, you should transmit on exactly the number of frequencies you have privilege for, and none of the other ones.
But if you do, nothing will happen. Neither the FCC nor the ham radio operators in your neighborhood are able to track you or your location. They can't track you down if you're transmitting while you're driving in your car.
That is absolutely not true. That is absolutely
I've seen that a lot, and I will agree that is 100% not true because I have done it myself. I made a couple videos about the Kraken. That Kraken is an amazing piece of hardware. Not only did I use it to go to a guy's front door, I didn't knock because that's not wise. You don't knock on a stranger's door that you're, bad
even in
idea.
California.
Yeah. But one of them, so we had a repeater jamming issue, which is funny because now there's some other repeaters that are having jamming issues. And the same guy who I went to his front door jamming our repeater, a year or so later, just got busted jamming another repeater. Same guy, same house, same trailer.
You mentioned the Kraken.
Anyway,
technology has improved so much that it's harder and harder for people to do that. From my point of view.
evade.
Yes. Yeah.
Right. So what I was saying is that using the Kraken, we had another jammer who thought he was smart. He wasn't going to get caught because he was driving around in his car. Mm-hmm. Took a couple more hours. I did it myself with my Kraken driving in my car, couple hours.
Yeah.
Pulled up right behind him, took pictures of him. So do not think that that's a myth busted. You can.
Definitely.
Relatively easy. It's kind of expensive, but it is not difficult to track.
Kraken is not that expensive. What is it, like $500?
Well, the box is, when I bought it, was $500 or $600. Then you got to buy the antenna array, and then I had to buy an Android device because it doesn't work with iPhone.
Okay. Right. So I mean, most repeater owners, you could just pool your repeater owner, fund of community people and be like, oh yeah, here we got a Kraken. Here you go. Yeah.
Then you got to learn how to use it. It is not a turnkey, easy to use device, but once you learn how to use it,
it's
amazing.
It's killer.
Amazing. Okay, myth busted.
Busted.
We kind of talked about this already. It's just kind of different. If you transmit on GMRS frequencies using a ham radio, you will go to jail. You will be fined and go to jail. Fined by the FCC.
It's really...
Again, it's transmitting out of your authorized...
Yeah.
Well, this is specifically transmitting on a non-type accepted device on frequencies that it's not type accepted to transmit on.
It's a really weird distinction, but that's kind of what sets amateur radio apart. Is amateur radio, ham radio operators, a part of our license, this is one of those hobbyist things we can do, is we can go buy a retired first responder Motorola radio, and we can modify it to transmit on the amateur radio space, or maybe it already does. It doesn't matter. And we're fine with using it because we are the ones that have to mandate or make sure that the radio is sound to be in those frequency spaces, not create interference, that kind of thing. The other services don't work that way. As Randy mentioned, if you're going to have a GMRS radio to transmit on GMRS frequencies, you have to use a type-accepted radio for that service. There is no stipulation that you could hand-build a GMRS radio and use it to transmit on GMRS frequencies. You guys don't have that. Amateur radio does. GMRS users do not. It's a type-accepted thing. It's just the reality of those radio systems.
Okay. So if you use your Baofeng non-type accepted for GMRS, it's not approved by the FCC for GMRS, are you going to be fined by the FCC and go to jail? No. Well,
unless you do
again,
something
technically,
you could. It's kind of like a police officer when they pull you over, and they pull you over for speeding, and then they find out that you got a tail light out, and they throw another fine on top of it. If someone was doing something that brought the ire of the FCC down, again, Randy and I are saying they could fine someone for doing these things. They generally don't.
Violate the rule. It
does violate the rules. And one of the things that you see every once in a while is unlawfully transmitting out of privileged space or transmitting on a frequency you are not privileged. And there are also use cases of using not a type-accepted device, right? That is a true thing. They could fine you, but do they? Not really. At least I haven't seen
it. And as far as I am aware, never, not once, ever, has the FCC done any sort of enforcement, fine or jail or anything, for someone that was a person, not a business, that was simply talking to their friends on GMRS frequencies with a non-type accepted radio.
Never in my life have I heard that. Never in my life have I heard
happened. It is against the rules, as we said,
but
it just hasn't happened. So that's, as described, that is myth busted.
I think
could change tomorrow. Somebody could get fined tomorrow.
They could just go nuts fining people.
Find the biggest YouTuber that talks about it all the time and catch him red-handed.
Where am I pointing this way? Yeah, I'm pointing this way.
Okay, so speaking of that, GMRS YouTubers are way more cool than ham radio YouTubers.
I don't know. I feel like you got to have some more characteristics in that. It's both.
Cool. It's a coolness factor.
You know when someone tries really hard to be cool and they try to separate themselves? We're both doing nerdy stuff, but you're like, no, but my nerdy thing is
I only do it on the weekend.
You know what it sounds like?
I only do it on the weekend in my Jeep.
Trying too hard. That's what it seems like. It seems like you're trying too hard.
All right, Josh. All right, enough.
It's just a tool for me, man. I don't know. I just chill with my radio. We're like buds, but we don't get all weird about it. It's just a tool. Like that. You're trying too hard, man.
All right.
The guy with all the videos on using the radio. It's like, it's just a tool. Just don't worry about it. It's just fine.
The guy that's got 20 of them right behind him.
Yeah. I don't have a problem. You got a problem. They're all just tools to me.
All right. In an emergency, anyone can use any radio without a license.
Not, okay. Yeah, this is very specific. There are nuances to this. So you can look this up, and please do. You can fact check me in the comments. You are able to use any form of communication to save a life in immediate harm, and there's some extension for property, assuming you've exhausted all other forms of normal communication that you have at your capability. So your cell phone, right? Your cell phone is the thing. You got to go use this first. If you're in an area with no cell phone, okay, now what's the next level of communication at your disposal that you're lawfully allowed to transmit on? Those are things you have to do first, exhausting those before you pick up an amateur radio or GMRS radio without a license and transmit on it. Or a cop's radio, that kind of thing.
So protection of life or property.
Immediate danger.
Immediate danger. Okay, I guess that's it. And so that excludes, you're camping and you ran out of beer and somebody's got to run down to the local 7-Eleven.
Or the one that I always liked. I got a ton of messages asking me, well, since we're on lockdown because of COVID-19, is that an emergency situation where I can now transmit on my Baofeng? And I went, no, absolutely not. Absolutely not.
All right. So myth not busted. So you technically, again, it's nuanced.
It's nuanced.
In an emergency to protect life or property.
Yeah.
With no other means of communication.
Yeah.
you can use any radio at your disposal. But if
Yeah.
you run out of beer when you're camping, you can't.
I guess
If you
also,
have your cell phone right next to you.
so there's a weird flip side of that one too, because a bunch of cops actually commented on a video where I talked about this exact thing. So let's say you stumble upon or you see a cop get shot in the line of duty. Cop gets shot. Cop goes down. Cop can't, help himself. I think you should probably call 911 first, right, and get a 911 call going, blah, blah, blah. But a number of cops have said, no, man, if you're okay and you're safe enough to run up to me and help, I want you to push my little red button that's on the handheld, and so, yeah, you're technically transmitting. Or even pick up the mic and say, hey, I just stumbled upon an officer down. We need help immediately. Because that might be faster than going through the whole 911 dispatch system. So
who's got to figure out where you are and who to transfer the call to.
Right. So if you want to start a 911 call and then immediately start grabbing that guy's mic and start asking for help on it, I think there are extenuating circumstances when it comes to emergencies that will vary. But if you take the FCC at its word, you need to exhaust all your forms of communication before you start to transmit without privileges.
Only to immediately protect life or property.
That's right.
It's funny that property is allowed in there.
Some things are expensive.
Oh, that's true.
Some things are more expensive than the human is worth. I don't know. Maybe that's what they
That's
think.
definitely true.
There's a corporate clause built into that, I think, somewhere.
Right. The spurious RF emissions from a cheap Chinese radio are dangerous. They can interfere with or prevent emergency services, communications, air traffic control, or interfere with the electronics in the airplanes flying overhead, potentially causing the airplane to crash. Spurious RF emissions.
This is such a complex, nuanced thing. Plausibly true, and I'll explain why. If you have a radio that creates spurious emissions, I already did a video where I used it transmitting on the fundamental frequency, right? So the frequency listed on the screen. And the even harmonics going up the frequency space, I was able to get like a half a mile from my home, right? And I could still hear it. I could still hear myself, right? That space. It just depends on where that harmonic is. If that harmonic is in a first responder emergency service and that happened to be used by someone who is trying to save a life or do whatever it is they do in their job, you would be interfering with that person. The issue with interfering with electronics on planes, I don't think that's the primary thing. But if you had a spurious emission that happened to create interference that prevented a plane from being able to communicate with something, well then yeah, that would be interference. It wouldn't necessarily be like damaging the devices. It would be you can't communicate appropriately. And that's what brought the FCC to my buddy's house with his cable box. It was frequency that had a signal on it that was created by his little amplifier thing that led to there being a problem at that local airport. And that's why the FCC got involved, because it became an issue. It was a problem for interference.
Okay, so in the context of the myth, we've got our little 5-watt Baofeng UV5R, which is lucky to be outputting 3 watts. And you've got your spurious emissions down the line at the even harmonics, right? Of which each one down is like half the power. It's like exponentially lower, right? So if I start with 3 watts on the fundamental.
Mm-hmm. It was loud enough for me to hear. Well, it was loud enough for me to hear. So I use the talk pod. You got a talk pod, right? I have like a first generation talk pod. And
yeah, those are bad. Those are noisy.
That has no filtering at all. And I don't even know if it was half power. It was the dBm that was received by my spec-an was like, it was really actually quite powerful. And I was able to go way far away from my house, again, a half mile, and that's suburbs. So that's me ground level and me over here with the listener ground level, and I'm able to hear. If you go back to how we started this conversation, what if I had a higher vantage? And I'm just talking to my buddy. Maybe we have a higher vantage in the woods and we're playing paintball. And I'm transmitting now down my signals. My even harmonic signal is getting picked up by an ambulance that's driving down in the town that I can see. and it's the same frequency or maybe subtly off frequency, so they just start like, am I interfering with them? Yeah. Is this such a crazy, rare statistical chance of this happening? Also, yeah. But to answer your question, yeah, it's possible.
So
the interference
spurious
isn't a
RF
joke.
emissions, they're real.
They're real.
It is possible to. I literally saw somebody saying that it could bring down an aircraft.
I don't believe that.
So okay, but they can cause, like you just explained.
Yeah.
Spurious RF emissions are real, especially on the cheaper radios, because they cut corners on the filtering or whatever it is that cuts that down, right?
It's pretty simple. If spurious emissions weren't a problem, then why would we care if they existed? Like, why would they be a part of all these type-accepted radio requirements and all that stuff? Why would we put any filtering or proper electronic design in our appliances? If we didn't do that, your television wouldn't work. Your devices that you want to communicate on certain frequencies wouldn't work because you'd have other devices that, for lack of filtering and poor electronics design, were transmitting interference on those same frequencies your other devices are trying to use, right? We all exist in this electromagnetic spectrum, and if we don't stay in our little sandbox of where we pass frequencies, we will interfere with other sandboxes that are right up next to each other or evenly spaced throughout at the harmonics level.
Now, in order to be able to put the FCC sticker on the box of a GMRS radio, in order to say it's a GMRS radio, it has to pass a testing and spurious emission output testing, right? It's got to be certified.
They send it to the FCC or someone to some kind of testing agency, and they test it.
So, and I have seen some people suggesting that when I buy a GMRS radio, I'm buying a GMRS radio because it's just a tool, and I'm not a radio dork, even though I've got all these radios behind me.
That's right.
That I need to test that for spurious RF emissions. Should the average normal guy going to buy a GMRS radio to use off-roading or hiking, is this something it is his responsibility and he needs to care about spurious RF emissions?
This is a good question, and I got my GMRS hat on because I'm a GMRS licensed operator too. For you GMRS guys, no. You bought a type-accepted radio. It says FCC. You should check the FCC. Now, okay, let's do that. Open up the back of your radio. It's got a little FCC number. Google that number, and if you pull it up and it's a completely different radio, then it's possible that the Chinese radio you bought, they just slapped any old number on there and said, yeah, these people aren't going to worry about it, and that could be a problem. Right, so they sold you a piece of junk, no-filtered, spurious generator, and they slapped another radio sticker on it with a fake number. That's definitely probably happened. And then you go use it. Yeah, you should probably buyer beware enough to not do that. Now, for you amateur radio operators, I argue that you probably should care about this. I know a lot don't. We just trust that the FCC sticker means quality. It doesn't necessarily. You probably should test it because at the end of the day, the amateur radio operator with our license, we are not supposed to create the interference, and we're supposed to make sure of that through judicious use of testing equipment and maths and everything else we use at our disposal to make sure we aren't creating interference. Bit of a distinction with GMRS.
Basically, GMRS users shouldn't care.
No. Well.
No,
No. I think you should look up the FCC number. Look up the FCC number on your radios. You might be surprised.
Well, there have been issues where they were fake. They made a mistake on the number. It was a typo. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that has happened. We talked about this earlier a little bit. If you interfere with police or other emergency services with your radio, you will go to jail and you will face a large fine.
Will go to jail? No, at least not that I've seen. Face a large fine, though. We have seen that. That has happened.
Right. Well, I have actually seen there was an enforcement, I think 2 enforcements of somebody actually going to jail. So
that
again,
an FCC thing, or that was interfering with a police officer thing?
The charges were interfering with a police officer thing. The FCC can't put you in jail. The police were working with the FCC to track down who was doing this.
And they can absolutely do that.
Right. So that is true. You will go to jail, maybe not, but you will get into trouble if you are intentionally and ongoing screwing with the police or the ambulance or whoever.
Yeah.
But again, it's not the FCC that puts you in jail. It is the police.
Correct. Yeah.
Because in most, or maybe even the FBI or somebody like that, because
Sure.
in most states there are laws against interfering with police and emergency services.
Yeah, you
so you go to jail
used a
for
radio to interfere with the officers. What you did.
Right. You go to
And
jail for
that's a crime.
interfering.
That is a
Right.
crime, though, right? So that we could say that is a crime. You can face jail time for that. And then the FCC just dawdles over and says, "Oh, you used a radio to do this? Here's a fine to go ahead and add insult to injury that you're experiencing."
Correct.
Yeah.
But just to be clear, it was not the FCC that put you in jail. They were standing there watching, laughing when the police did it.
That's right.
The FCC is monitoring everything and proactively listening for anyone breaking the rules.
The FCC is God. They're omnipresent at all times, everywhere. Every person you ever think about doing something wrong on the air, just know that they're everywhere all at once at all times. No, of course not. It's just too difficult, particularly when it comes to line of sight communication to monitor it all the time. There's no computing power that exists to be able to do that and to determine whether that is a good use of radio or a bad use of radio. There's no technology that exists to be able to do that.
All right. And the fact that they're not doing enforcements every day would kind of prove that. For, you know, people breaking little laws. I have seen comments of people saying that the CIA is actually monitoring all or much of everything over the air, and I don't know if that's true or not. If that was even true, it's not the FCC.
Isn't that illegal? That you can't.
Josh,
your intelligence, like your federal police, all that stuff, whatever you want to call that, they can't monitor everyone. They can only monitor the people that they have an open investigation on. Isn't that true?
I think what the law says. I'm sure that is the case. Let's see what the people in the comments
Wasn't that the whole
say.
Snowden thing?
Yeah, but we had the what do we call it? The Patriot Act?
Oh, that's true. Yeah. How'd we get that again?
Yeah, I don't want to. Yeah, we're not going to talk about that.
Yeah.
The FCC goes after rogue, ham, and GMRS users that are causing interference with other ham or GMRS users all the time. The FCC is always busting people that are out there jamming repeaters and goofing around.
Just purely from the use of the word always, the answer is no. That is certainly not happening. I will add, though, to this, there are some communique with the FCC that does not get published. The FCC's enforcement page only includes what they have taken to a certain level of their processing. There are lower level stuff that does not get published. So like a ham who gets notified that, hey, you probably shouldn't do that, or please stop doing that, and then it stops, and then the process goes back down, then it doesn't progress further enough to be on the website. So they're not.
So the website lists enforcements. So you've got investigation, and then some stuff, and then, okay, we've investigated this guy, now we're going to do an enforcement.
Yeah.
Now, they sometimes list warning letters also on that enforcement page. Yeah, see, that's what I don't know if it's always.
They do not.
Okay.
In fact,
so,
Laura Smith at the FCC, who is the amateur radio person that oversees that for the FCC, has said specifically that they used to release warning letters, but they've stopped doing that because of the kind of the negative connotation that comes from it. So the warning letter, if the person stops doing the thing and it's never a problem again, should that be held against them? Maybe not. I would leave that up to you all to comment on that. But that's the decision the FCC has taken, and so they do not publish their warning letters. So we don't know. The truth is we don't know.
Okay. So the mean letter.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess some people would say, okay, I got a mean letter. The FCC came after me. Mm-hmm. So they may be doing that. We don't know how often they're doing that. Mm-hmm. But when I say goes after, I mean, I'm usually referring to an enforcement. I actually got into trouble. I got a fine or a jail time, which we already talked about, for simply causing interference, jamming a repeater, or messing around on, giving other people on the allowed authorized frequencies, giving people a hard time. That, as in the last 15 years, I think it happened once, and that was some guy that was doing all kinds of other stuff and had ignored all the letters and ignored, and then doubled down and kept doing it. So it basically,
we do have a guy. He has been a long time interferer of the WARFA-net, and he is an amateur radio operator that has received a fine from the FCC. And he has continued to appeal it and fight it as much as he can. That is an ongoing thing. There has absolutely been amateur radio operators who have been fined. Don't take this the wrong way, everybody watching. We're focusing on what Randy said here. Always. They're always going after the bad actors. They're always in creating these enforcement situations where people are getting fined. That is not the case. But they do fine people, and they have fined people, and they will fine people. That is true. Just depends on how much it happens. Not often. Which is not often.
And you really have to go over the line and then over it again for them to come after you, to care. A Roger beep can damage some repeaters and should never be used.
Have people told you it will damage?
It could. So the exact words that were told to, they weren't told to me, I saw it on an online forum, could damage some old repeaters. So you should always turn it off.
That is total BS. That's total BS. Why would the Roger beep be any different than a human voice?
What is it with the Roger beep that some people feel the need to control other people and say and make up lies?
Yeah, I think it's etiquette. It's etiquette, and instead of just saying, hey, we don't like the Roger beep here in this repeater, this is a Roger beep free repeater, they just rather make up a dumb lie to get people to comply with what they want than to actually have a human conversation and address things like human beings with common human decency. I think that's where that comes from. That's not a real thing. That's not real.
Myth busted.
Very much so.
The ham radio hobby is dying.
No. I think we have
I've
more
seen that
hams.
A lot.
We've had more hams in the last 5 years since the introduction of the online testing than we've had before that, as far as just pure growth.
Well, those online tests are going to be the end of ham radio. Just
that's
like
it.
The no Morse code end of that was the end of ham radio.
Just like that was, just like AM was the death of ham radio, said all the CW operators, and that single sideband thing is going to kill amateur radio, said all the AM operators, and so on and so forth and so on and so forth. Yes.
Do you get, I know you get, but let's give food for thought to people that are watching. Do you understand why many people say that ham radio is dying when they go online? So as a potential new ham radio operator, which I was, the first place these days that the potential ham radio operator goes is online.
Yeah.
They go to the forums, they go to the YouTube videos to start learning and asking questions. And when this potential person goes online, starts asking dumb questions because he doesn't know, he's learning, right?
Right.
There is a very high chance, very high probability that some jerkwad, sad ham, as they are often referred to, is going to come and talk down to that person and just drive them away from the hobby.
Yeah.
This potential newcomer, many of them, myself included, driven away from the hobby, perhaps even into pirating, talking on the radio without a license because he was driven away by a sad ham.
Yeah, there's by the way, the same thing happens if you go to a club meeting. Go in person. There's always
to see in person. They're usually a lot nicer. There's always some low lives, but
sure.
whatever.
There's
low lives.
There's salted.
Jerks.
There's salted hams everywhere. They're a little salty. They're probably not as bad in person because you're not anonymous, right? But there's some humans that just suck, and there's a lot of people who like. No, it's like every hobby. It's like every hobby. If you had if you had a club where the club was car fans of Rancho Cucamonga, and you had a website for it, and they're all just talking, it would devolve into Ford's better than Chevy, electric cars suck, I only do off-roading, paying for roads is stupid, why can't we all just have off-road vehicles, I don't want to pay taxes on that. It would devolve into craziness, and that's what happens with amateur radio, is that we've all come under this roof of radio operator in a space. Amateur radio is so huge, the aspects of things that we can do, and everybody has very specific little pet projects and things that they love and they hate and blah 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 blah. The reality is that they take all those personal feelings and they dump them on people, particularly when they think it's anonymous and it's the internet. That happens with everything. Video game consoles, Pokemon. You pick it. I don't know.
I think it happens more in certain hobbies because those certain hobbies tend to attract a certain type of people. It happens a lot in the firearms world. I know it happens a lot.
Another good one.
In the I don't know what you call it, the prepper or G.I. Joe game playing world.
Yeah, the LARPing.
Yeah, whatever they call it.
LARPing.
And it happens everywhere, but in those, including the radio world or the world where one of the things they tend to brag about a lot is how smart they think they are. It just seems to happen a lot.
You're totally right.
Those hobbies.
You're right that it the more technical something has, or the more brand loyalty a hobby has, then you see a lot of that. The gun community is actually a really good example. Of that. But yeah, no, amateur radio absolutely has a lot of keyboard commandos on the internet. It's something that is literally why I do the things the way we do on my channel and on the Discord and the Facebook, is because I hate that stuff. I won't tolerate it. Because it doesn't help anything. It helps no one.
It helps me because it gives me more stuff to talk about on my channel. More people make fun of.
There you go.
But it certainly does not help the hobby.
No. It's horrible for the hobby.
Yeah. All cheap Chinese radios, no exception, are nothing but junk, and you should never buy one. And any ICOM, Kenwood, or Yaesu will be better in every way, always, than a cheap Chinese radio.
So the first part of that is they're all complete junk, all of them. No, that's just not true. The Chinese radios have come a long way. There are outstanding. There are brands that are way better than others. So it's a scaling thing. I like the N76. I think they're the VGC N76, Vero VGC N76. I love that radio. Wushun as a brand is generally pretty good.
Wuxin. Now, Ocean. That's the right way to say it.
No, that is the translation. Wushun is ocean.
Yeah.
Wushun. Anyway.
Wuxin, ocean. Go on.
All right. But the Japanese radios have long just held a quality level that the Chinese radios didn't. Now, what's happened is kind of interesting. Is there is a number of even Japanese radio manufacturers that have a lot more Chinese parts in their radio. Even some manufacturing and assembly has happened in Japan or in China now these days for some of it. So I think the lines are beginning to blur in terms of outstanding quality and using only the benchmark of quality to say this radio is good or bad. I will say that China for a long time has had a leg up in pushing out any functionality they think would be a selling point onto the masses. And Japan has been way slower to have a feature set go forward into new and different things. And China, I think, has pushed them to be quicker to incorporate things like USB-C in all of their radios and a number of other things that I think is good. So I think that the answer is far more nuanced than that. And anything that's just straight binary is not good in this example.
Right. And I think a lot of it has to do, you said, the benchmark, right? Mm-hmm. How do I define the best radio? If I define, like a lot of people do, the best radio is the one that works and costs the least amount of monies, then a UV5R is the best radio.
Best radio.
But if you prefer, you want quality or whatever, then it may be different. It may not be a UV5R. Probably not the best radio.
The
if
lines
you're looking
have
for quality.
blurred, though. The lines have blurred. If you asked me in 2015, there was no question Japanese radios were heads and shoulders above the Chinese offering. 10 years after that, I'd still give the nod to most of the Japanese radios, particularly as you start dipping into the $250 plus area. But that's probably already out of the target buying area where, again, these markets are a little bit different, right?
So myth busted as worded today, these days, maybe a long time ago, 10 years ago. All right, Josh, we're running out of time, but very quickly, before we say our goodbyes, who is it? We sort of already answered this, but who are spreading these vicious myths and why?
Who's doing it?
All right, so first of all, I think before we jump to the obvious answer, a lot of them, the technical ones, like coiling up your antenna, causing a problem, things like that, the ones that are more technical, I think are from people that just are stupid. You know, they read something on an online forum and misinterpreted it, and then they posted it, and then somebody else misinterpreted it a little more, and then they reposted it, and by the end of this game of telephone, it's just totally wrong, and you're not smart enough to know any better. So some of it is just, some of this stuff is technical, and they don't know any better. But then there's that whole gatekeepers trying to keep us lesser people out of their world.
I think, so the easiest answer is, you got the gatekeeper effect. But I also think that it's a fair number of people that are spreading misinformation that they heard, and it worked on them, and it worked on people that they heard also hear the same thing, and they fell into what was expected of them, and that was good, and that was the right way it should have been done. And so they are just reiterating what they heard ad nauseum to try and make the good happen again. But we've now reached a societal point where we start to question, well, why are you doing this? Why are you saying this? The ends don't always justify the means when it comes to throwing around misinformation. It's right to have the right information. It's right to be as correct as possible, to change your opinion if your information is wrong. It only helps everybody out. And to create a world that's built on false dogma and fake understandings is, I think, a very bad idea. So I hope that we're going into the world where we're all just trying to be as accurate as we can be, and we shun anyone who wants to get people to control them, right, if you will, by passing around this misinformation and letting it act as some kind of a intimidation mechanism. I hate that. I hate it. And so, I mean, that's why we're doing this video, right, is to hopefully shed some light on people and hopefully get people who are the ones that repeat this kind of information to maybe think a second time and say, why am I doing this? What is the point of this? And, well, okay, if I stop doing this, some bad thing's going to happen. Well, is it bad? Why is it bad? And maybe I shouldn't be pursuing it this way. Maybe I should go talk to the FCC, or maybe I should better understand how the FCC works and why they do what they do. And there's probably a bigger boogeyman you aren't thinking about, and instead you're just repeating some rehashed lie or false truth that you've heard many, many times before, is my guess. That's my guess.
And there you have it. Josh, thank you for joining.
Hey, thank you. I appreciate these. A lot of fun.